Hi friends. Today I wanted to share with you some tips, documentation, and example files to show how you can make transparent or partially transparent objects like windows or plant foliage for putting those things into Decentraland starting with Blender. There are a number of things to get right. If you get them right, you will have glass that works in Blender, in Babylon Sandbox, in the Janus and Decentraland Builder tools, and obviously in Decentraland itself. In the comments below this video, you will find a link to an online document with detailed instructions, and the document includes a link to the sample files you'll see in this video. First, let's talk about where I started on this journey, which was when working with Cyber Mike and EO. The two modelers have been helping me with the conference center. I was working with them to build trees with foliage that look pretty nice, and you'll see a sample from this sakura tree in the demo. But these trees were all made using this technique. You can see there's quite a variety of what you can do. But these were actually made from photographs originally of this foliage. If you get up close, you can see that it's made from planes with semi-transparent painting on them with alphas, so that you get leaves, but you also get space between the leaves where you can see through. And whereas in some environments overlapping transparencies don't work great, they work fine in the Babylon-based rendering of the Decentraland client. So this is where I started. But then also I wanted to get some buildings with glass windows. The glass to be reflective and a little tinted so you could see it. This is an example of glass rendered in Blender. These models also work in Decentraland. And so I was on a journey to figure out how to get glass to work so it would be transparent in both directions, a little tinted so you could see it, and be reflective. So that's what this is about. So this is the document that I'm going to link in the description of the video, and it is kind of a tutorial or reference guide on how to make transparent objects, be it glass and windows or plant foliage, kind of the pipeline of how to do that work, and some important notes, but then also examples of very specific glass, looks of various types of glass and how you can get them. There's also an example of the working with foliage, how to export your files to GLTF properly for glass in these examples, and then a link to example files at the bottom of the document. I'm going to start us off in Blender and talk about some examples of glass. So here is the sample file that is provided with this documentation. You can see there's 9 cubes across the front, 9 planes behind those. And if I zoom in a little bit, you can see that a little bit more clearly. And you can see that they are nice glass. They're reflective, they're transparent, some of them are tinted. I have in the first 4 cubes and planes on the left, I have 4 types of glass placed on cubes and on planes. And the first one it's a pale white untinted glass. It's very reflective, it's very transparent, but it's slightly visible, and it's a slightly frosted look. So you can see that there, and I have it also on a plane, so you can see it. The boxes behind it's just so that you can see through it. That's what the white boxes are for. This glass is very reflective, slightly frosted looking, and not totally invisible. And then the settings for this glass are all these examples use the principal BSDF shader in Blender 2.80. It's currently in beta, but it's working quite well. It's also using the transparent BSDF shader combined using the mix shader going to material output. The key settings for this are to get the shininess, you use metallic all the way up. I think in this network of nodes in Blender, the transmission actually doesn't matter. I have the both the base color and the transparent BSDF set with, let me go into Blender so you can see this. I have them set with alpha at 0.3. And you can see it's untinted. Let me get that back up again. The glass is untinted. It's white. It's a pale gray actually. It's about 0.5 on RGB and 0.3 on the alpha. And I have that. This is kind of a standard network for these glasses. I have that going into a mix shader that's also being mixed with transparency. I think that the transparency setting in this transparent shader also doesn't matter, but you also want to use white, a bright white for that. They're being mixed together in the mix shader with a 0.33 factor to say I want 0.33 of the first item, the transparency, and the rest of the 100% coming from the principal shader. And then let's go to the material output. This is a pretty typical layout for all of these glass nodes. I'm looking at this in the shading tab in Blender 2.80. The third example of glass has a little different arrangement. The second one is just somewhat different settings. It's almost invisible when you render it in Decentraland. Pretty much you only see it if you get a reflection off of it. So this wouldn't be a safe glass for like a window. Somebody would walk into the window thinking it was a door. But in some cases you might want a basically invisible glass, but nevertheless very reflective. And so a little different settings here in terms of the key settings here that are different are the transparency and the excuse me, let me do it here in Blender. The transparency here in the BSDF, principal BSDF shader is has alpha at 0. So actually it does matter. See? Otherwise they're the same as it's the same as the previous one. In the third item, I have an alternate arrangement. The right hand side of these nodes looks very similar, but the base color and the alpha factor, the mix factor, are coming from an image. It's the a frond of the sakura tree that you saw in the previous Decentraland scene. And let me get rid of the birds here that are singing in the Decentraland scene. Excuse me. Here it is. I think if I close this out, I'll lose the bird sounds. Okay. By using the this is an image texture node in Blender, and I've loaded the Sakura foliage into it. It's a PNG file that has an alpha in it. The alpha is transparent where the leaves are not, or the flowers, and it's untransparent where the flowers are. And I've used a simple cube UV mapping to apply that to it's a very simplest arrangement to get that onto the material onto the objects. So the alpha from the Sakura foliage is controlling the mix factor, and the color from it is the source of the base color. Instead of having a color set in here with transparency, it's this other arrangement that provides the transparency. And I want to stand corrected on something, which is that the transparency in the principled BSDF shader, like on this node, does matter, as we figured out. But I think it doesn't matter in the transparent BSDF. You just make that white, because I'm getting nice transparency here, being mixed from the alpha channel from pure white in the transparent BSDF. In each of these cases, I put the material on both a cube and on a plane behind it, so that you can see what it looks like on a three-dimensional object or on glass. Notice that the rear side of these glass objects looks fine in Blender, but we're going to see that they're totally invisible in some other contexts, and the glass samples I provide further down the row solve that problem. So I think the other thing to notice is that why would you use a cube versus a pane? If you had something like a decal on the glass like this, by using a plane, you get the effect that the rear side is mirror image. You can see that that frond of glass of foliage on that pane. When you turn it around, it's the opposite. Whereas if you put it on a cube or a cuboid, even if you make it thin, the two sides are different. This is an example of that down here, where the two sides of this image are not related to each other. Maybe they are here in Blender, but they're not when you put it somewhere else. Which is why you want to use a plane if you want to put like a decal or something on glass, or for foliage. The main difference with foliage is you don't make it shiny. You don't have metalness. Metallic. You set that to 0. All right, so let's go down a little bit further here. We talked a little bit about this model here. I wanted to try out some tinted glass. So this fourth model here is the base color is blue. Alpha is 0.3 there. I wanted to get it to not be so colorful and to be plenty transparent. I raised the factor here to 0.5. Otherwise, it's not as transparent as you might like. And then let's talk about what I did with the additional objects down here. There's two ways to make thin glass. The front row here is these are actually cubes. They are like this guy here. It's a cube, but the mesh is very thin. I've changed one of the dimensions to be about 2 millimeters, and the pane behind it is a plane. But in order to solve the problem of the transparency being just totally invisible on the back side in some contexts, like in Decentraland, I applied a modifier to the plane, for example, on this one here. The modifier is a solidify modifier, and the settings in that are, so you just do an add modifier to the plane, and I set the thickness on that to 2 millimeters. So you can see that the thickness on these two objects is similar. I've also tipped them back at an angle so they catch the light in the sky here a little bit better, so you can see how reflective they are. The one thing, these four are the same, other than the geometry being a thin cube and a thickened plane. They're the same as the first four. I added one more here at the end that takes a different approach to tinting the glass. It's also reflective, although not quite as reflective. But you have kind of a different approach to tinting the glass. And that is that, well, it's the Cube 9, or it's the fifth glass in the example. And that is, again, I've used a ping file that has opacity, or the turn down, or the alpha to be almost transparent. I did that in GIMP. Same map as on the Sakura, but with a different image that is a kind of a dark teal blue-green color with a high degree of transparency. And its alpha, again, controls the factor, mixing transparency with a shiny principal BSTF. So that's the setup in Blender. Let's take a look at it in the Babylon sandbox, Babylon JS sandbox, which I don't already have up, so let me open it here. At sandbox.babylonjs.com, you have a nice tool in which you can test out a GLTF file. Before I do, let me just mention what you need to do when you're exporting these glass objects to GLTF. The most important two things to get it to work, I'll mention them both, and they're not obvious. One is up here at the top, I have it. Over on the right side in Blender, there's a blend mode setting, which by default is opaque, which means you won't get transparency. But if you want to go to the material, you can see that I've changed that from opaque to alpha blend. By default, it's opaque. So even when you're using these shaders for transparency, you do have to also set this to alpha blend. The other thing that's important is when you are exporting the file, if you have made a plane and that you use the solidify modifier to give it thickness, and then when you go to do the export from Blender to GLTF, be sure to apply modifiers. That is not a default. You want to use +Y up, which is a default, and then you have three choices as to how you want to export the GLTF. You can put it in multiple files, a GLTF, a bin, and textures, or you can embed all those files in the GLTF, or you can do that and then compress it to a binary format. I usually work with them separate for a couple of reasons. It actually, believe it or not, when you have multiple uses of the same texture, it's actually the smallest footprint, because it only exports the texture once, where it seems to embed it multiple times in the other formats. The reason I use this is that I can play around with the texture maps after making the GLTF if I want to try, like, changing the alpha on one of the textures or something like that, or changing a color, changing the lighting on the leaves or whatever. So you pick that here and make sure you have Y up and apply modifiers. If you want to export the whole scene, you just go ahead and leave this blank. If you want to select a certain object in your Blender scene and export just that, then you use that. So those are the important things in the usage of Blender. And once again, I'm using Blender 2.80 because it has really good GLTF support. It can both import and export GLTF. It's currently in beta, and they're warning you not to trust it, but I have had zero problems with it. So this Babylon.js tool is interesting. Here is the content from that Blender scene. The GLTF, the bin, the dark teal that's mostly transparent, some wood for the scene's floor, and its normal map to give a little bit of texture, and then the sakura foliage. If I just select all the files here and drag and drop them into that Babylon.js, just drop them on the screen here, sandbox.babylonjs.com, just drop them here, and you have to drag them all in. Then you get, in short order, you get the appearance of this in the Babylon renderer. And as you can see, that second piece of glass is just about invisible. It does reflect light when you get the light on it just right, but otherwise it's pretty much invisible. And you see that the all the other ones work too. If I come around to the back here, you'll see that the first four just disappear. This is why the best solutions I have found are the thickened plane, because you get the look at the sakura here. When I turn it around, the image is reversed on the back, which is what you want. Whereas the image on the box, the thinned cuboid, is not the same on the back like it was in Blender, but here it's a different image. So the thickened plane is the way to go. And all of these approaches to making glass work in the Babylon renderer. And let's take a look at it in Janus. So I have a Janus scene here that's empty, has nothing in it. This is in Vesta, and well, I seem to have lost my light in this scene. We'll see if that works okay. So what you do is you drop the GLTF into this view, and it just shows up in the scene. And so the question is where to get it from. I actually have placed it into the My Files area in Janus, which you can get to at the bottom of the scene over here in Inventory. And in my inventory, I have put the transparency content into the inventory in a folder. And if I click on a thing and say show URL, I get to see the URL here of the location in the web space at Vesta of the GLTF file. I just put that in my clipboard. Temporarily I go to a browser. It downloads it. I'm ignoring that, but the point is I'm getting the URL here in a way I can click it and drag it into my Janus scene. Excuse me. I see what I've done. I need to pull this to a different tab so I can tab back to the scene. All right, so I'm in edit mode here, and so I grab this URL and drag it in here, and in a moment it shows up, and I can place it in the scene by clicking, and then I'll come around to the front side of it here, and you can see that the glass is here. And unfortunately, I don't seem to have light on the scene, but the reflectivity does work. And like in the the Babylon sandbox, the second piece of glass here is just quite invisible. But the other pieces all work correctly. And they are visible on the backside, whereas the ones down here are not. They're missing on the backside. So this is why it's important to use the thickened plane as the best model for glass from Blender. All right, so I mean, I could export this scene to Decentraland from here by going into the view it in the pop-out, and on its menu, I'll just show you how you do this. I already have the scene in Decentraland, but on the menu here, convert for DCL, and what you get is an exported game.ts file for the STK. It's all set up for the scene. The reason I'm not seeing my content here is because I didn't save. So if I go over here and put it back in edit mode here, and once again drop that transparency in here, transparency demo in here, and I think I want to, yeah, it looks good. Oh, I have light now. I'm not sure what happened that other time, but you can see reflections on here, I think, now. Excuse me, I think I need to just click here to drop it in place. Yeah, now it's behaving better. So with light in the scene, I think you'll see some reflections. Oh, maybe I actually would have to put a physical light in the scene to see the reflections properly. I think I've seen, yeah, there's reflections here. You saw one there. Reflected the sun for a moment. Yeah. So if I do a save and view, then now the scene has the where are you? Well, in any case, this is not really about demonstrating Vesta today. Sorry that I'm missing something here, obviously, that I'm not doing right. So, because I've got this worked very well before. But in any case, let's go over to look at it in Decentraland, which is down here. I have, in the sample files, I have the scene content as well as the GLTF files. So we can walk across here and see the reflectivity on the glass. And I got a little haloing of color around the tinted glass and the reflections. I think that it's trying to tint the reflection, but in the center where it's really bright, it just washes it out to white. I think that's what's going on. On these other glasses, there's some frosting in some cases. Like on that first glass is frosted. I said this other glass, the second one, is pretty much invisible, except when you get a reflection on it. And as you can see, the backside of the Sakura is correct here. It's the same as on the front side, whereas the backside of the cube is not the same. So let me turn around here. You can see that this is a completely different image here. But on the thickened plane, it's correct. So all these glasses work in all these environments, and as I said, the trick with Foliage is to basically do the same thing as this, but turn metalness off so that it's not reflective, it's just transparent. So with that, I hope that gives you a sense of some good documentation on how to create transparency in Decentraland using Blender. I'll put the link to this document, and at the bottom of the document there's a link to the sample files right there. Have a good day, and catch you another time.